And welcome back to Trauma Agility. Here today we have Geralyn Ritter, and on May 12th, 2015, she was on her way home from an ordinary business trip when her Amtrak train 188 derailed outside of Philadelphia, and she was crushed in the crash, which killed 8 and injured hundreds. Her abdominal, chest, pelvic, and orthopedic injuries were overwhelming, and she was not expected to live. In a split second, she went from being a devoted mother of 3 boys and globe-trotting senior executive at one of America's largest companies to an immobilized ICU patient on a ventilator facing a highly uncertain future. And for her family, the hard-charging working mom that could be counted on to shake off the jet lag from a flight from Asia and make the middle school baseball game on time turned into someone almost unrecognizable and completely dependent on their care. So, Geralyn, thank you so much for being here today. And I am so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
So I actually saw this on the news back in 2015, and I was just thinking, my goodness, that was all that was going through my brain was, my goodness, what is going on? And so with the crash that just changed your entire life, what was your life like before the crash?
It was busy, I guess is the best way to describe it. My 3 sons were 8, 12, and 15, very active in every sport you can imagine. I worked full-time and traveled globally very extensively. On career days with my young son, I would play a game with the kids, like anybody in the 2nd grade class that could name a country I had not been to, would get a candy bar or something. So I was on the road a lot, and it might be Beijing or Brussels, but very often I was doing a lot of charitable work for my company, and it would be the slums in New Delhi or, outside of Kampala, Uganda, or walking through a hospital in South Africa. So I loved my job. I believed in what I did. I worked for a healthcare company. I loved my family. My husband and I have been married now almost 25 years. I have a great network of friends. It was busy, but I liked it that way.
What were your goals at that time? Like, where did you see your future?
So I'm a lawyer by training, but I spent most of my career in public policy and healthcare policy, trade policy, and my goals were really to have an impact. I saw public policy as kind of having an impact at scale, if you will. And so advocating around healthcare issues. At the time, I was president of my company's foundation. We had announced a $500 million initiative to help prevent maternal mortality, to help prevent women around the world from dying in childbirth. And I was really passionate. I just considered myself so lucky to be working in the private sector and getting to focus on those kinds of really important issues that affected real people and where our company really could make a difference.
Wow. So you had these goals and you had these dreams and you had this aspirations. And that day on the train, all of that was taken.
Full stop.
At that full stop. What do you remember of the accident?
I'll say 2 things. The first was I am constantly struck and just kind of continually dumbfounded by how ordinary a day it was. It was just a very, very regular day for me. I'd woken up early that morning, taken the train down to Washington, D.C. I had a board meeting in Washington. I got back on the train. I got off in Philadelphia. I was on a panel around women's leadership and the choices that women make to kind of define their career. I really enjoy talking about those kinds of issues. I got back on the train, was taking it one more stop to my house in New Jersey. And I texted my husband, leaving Philly, home soon. It had been a long day, of course. That was around 9 o'clock. And I knew I had about 30 more minutes on the train, and I wanted to read something. My husband texted back, "Great, see you then." It was all just so ordinary. And I stood up to get something to read out of my briefcase that was on the luggage rack above my head. And I felt the train rocking. It felt like we were going faster than I was used to coming right out of Philly. And again, I'd taken that train 100 times. I knew the route really well. And, I kind of held on tighter to the luggage rack, and I was a little annoyed because I couldn't reach into my briefcase to get what I wanted because of the rocking. And the rocking got more and more. And the next thing, I'm standing there in the middle of the aisle, holding on to the luggage rack as tight as I can. And I felt this sensation of tipping over. And I remember thinking, trains don't tip. Like, this is impossible.
Mm.
And the further we tipped, I remember thinking we are tipping over. And I remember screaming. And that's the last thing I remember.
So your body knew that something was off way before your brain ever picked it up.
Absolutely. My brain was like, this, no, it's okay. This is not happening. And like I said, then I think my brain realized, and I screamed, and I don't have any memory after that.
Yeah. So this is what I teach my clients all the time, is that your body knows.
Yep.
Your body knows that something is wrong before your brain ever realizes or wants to recognize, because your brain tries to logic through things. It's like a math problem, like 2 + 2 = 4, but 2 + 2 = 6 right now. Like, I don't understand, right? It's trying to understand, but your body's like, no. there's something going on here, which is very important, because that is your alarm system. Your alarm system is with your amygdala, and it floods your system, and then your brain tries to rationalize using the prefrontal cortex, and it really just can't in times of trauma. And so it shuts down at that point. When you say, like, I just remember screaming, it's interesting the details that you do hyper focus on, because that is your brain's defense mechanism to keep you safe, because it's just too much information overload.
Yeah.
And
it's so interesting that you say that, because I'm a really rational person, and that I maybe that comes from legal training, maybe it's my personality. I always have thought of myself that way, and I do take the train now. Since then, people are always surprised when I tell them that, but that's the part of my brain saying, hey, what are the chances, really? It's very difficult to work at a senior level on the East Coast and not take the train between, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington. And so, but when I take the train, especially if I'm standing up, walking toward the cafe car, and that train starts rocking, and I hold on and I grab the luggage rack, or even if I'm just sitting in my seat, when the train goes past the space, the area of the crash where 8 people lost their lives, I know it. I can be on a phone call. I can be focused on something else. And it's not a flashback. I know exactly where I am, but my body, I feel it in my bones. I feel the exact same feeling in my bones. And I can't, I don't know if it sounds cliche, but I can't describe it any other way. My body knows where I am, and it gets scared.
You can thank the vagus nerve for that, and your nervous system, and your body does recognize it. And I love how you said, well, I could be doing something else and logically focus on something, but my body still registers. And if you look at it from caveman days, like, this is our body's survival mechanism. This is how we survive, right? And we're in a environment where typically in modern days, we don't really have a threat to life. I mean, it's very rare. The biggest threat is other people, right? Not a train.
Right.
Yeah. And so when you're trying to go through that process, it's very convoluted. But once you understand, like, there's different systems at work in different parts of your body, different parts of your brain, that just basically warn you of, like, hey, we don't want to go through this again. This was bad.
Right. Yeah.
Really bad. So I love how you said like you got back on the train. Mm, that hits my heart. It hits my heart because that is bravery. A lot of people will just avoid. What
Yeah.
allowed you to get back on that train?
Determination that I was in control, that I was not going to let my life, my career be dictated by Amtrak. That I could do this. And I didn't know how I was going to react. So the first time I got on the train, my husband went with me. We'd been invited to an event in Washington, and he went with me. And when the conductor came and took my ticket, I handed it to him and I said, the last train I was on was Amtrak 188. And he looked at me like, what's this woman going to do to me? And I just sort of laughed and I said, tell the conductor to go slow. and it, maybe that was a defense mechanism of trying to reach for something humorous. And, but there was also, I think, ingrained in my body, this feeling of familiarity. I had sat on that train so many times doing work. So sitting on it, I bowed my head when we passed the crash site. I prayed for those that were lost at that site. I gave thanks that I was there and I was able to do what I was doing. And then I opened my computer and I worked the rest of the trip. And my husband sat beside me and we were okay. We were okay. So I always think about it. I never get on a train that I don't think about it. But I also take pride in saying, nope, this accident is not going to define me.
You integrated the trauma with your life.
Yes.
Instead of avoid and keep it separate, you integrated it and made good memories where bad memories were made.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that is like the best thing that you can do. When you were going through your recovery, how long did it take you?
I don't think my recovery is ever going to be done in reality. But the most intense phase, I was in the ICU for a couple of weeks. I was on a ventilator for more than a week. I've had just dozens of surgeries. My chest was crushed. My abdominal organs were all severely compromised. My pelvis was the worst. It was completely broken in half. And an object had penetrated the left side and crushed the left side of it. So I was in a wheelchair for a long time. I was on a walker for a long time, but I did learn, and I did gain the strength. Lots of hardware surgeries for hardware in, hardware out, more hardware in, other hardware out.
Like the Home Depot.
And in the beginning, we were just so happy that I'd survived because the doctors had specifically told my family, you need to come quickly. And I have 3 siblings. They're all doctors. One of my brothers packed a dark suit for my funeral. The other thought about it and took it out of his bag because he decided it would be bad luck and he would just buy one if he needed it. But they really did not expect me to live. And so in the beginning, we were just so grateful that I was alive and I didn't have a major brain injury, so that it took me a while to regain consciousness, and I was most certainly massively concussed, but I was able to recognize people and I was able to move. I broke my neck and 3 vertebrae in my lower back, but I broke them in just such a way that it didn't hit my spinal cord. And so we were just so grateful. The doctors said, we can't believe she doesn't have a major brain injury. She's not paralyzed. Like, I don't understand. My orthopedic surgeon told me, I have no medical explanation for how your body absorbed so much force to do what it did to you and your brain isn't swollen, and so we were just so grateful. But, eventually I got out of ICU. I got out of the regular hospital. I got out of the rehab hospital. And reality kind of hits when you get home and absolutely nothing is the same. I was in too much pain to even, I kept all my pills by my bedside and I had this kind of hospital bed that automatically raised up. But I would wake up in the night in too much pain to even reach for the pills beside me. I would sort of elbow my husband, and he would get up in the middle of the night, walk around the bed, open the pill bottle, raise my bed up. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And so eventually you can only be grateful for so long. I tried to tell myself this pain means you're alive. And it's like, yeah, but this still is really awful. And so I really plunged into a very deep depression. I did suffer PTSD. I was on very strong painkillers for a long time. I had to wean off of them and go through withdrawal symptoms of weaning off fentanyl and Oxycontin. I had a very major surgery a year after the accident where I coded and almost died. So it was a very long recovery that second summer. Once again, I think there's a break though after about 2.5 years. I did go back to work over 2 years after the accident part-time. And people ask me, why are you going back to work? And I think work to me was a kind of a synonym for normality. It meant I was still me. It meant I could do this. And I also believed in my work. I liked my work. So even going back full time felt like a real victory. I'm still hospitalized almost every week. Not every week, goodness, every year. Something comes up. I'm just, my body is just different now. But people always tell me, gosh, we never know. Because all my injuries are on my torso, all the scars are on my torso. In normal clothes, people don't see it. And my standard joke is, well, I'm glad I don't look like a train wreck. But, on the other hand, there's a little wistfulness in that because there is so much that they know. They say I would never know. And I say, yeah, you will never know. Because nobody can really understand that hasn't been there.
Right. When you say, when you talk about the motions and kind of the trajectory of it, it went from gratitude to severe depression. How did you get out of that to where you are now?
Really gradually. And I first went to kind of the tools I was used to. I like to read. I like to learn. I have a couple advanced degrees. And so once I could focus enough to do it, I started buying books on trauma. I started trying to understand why I was so sad, why I couldn't quit crying, why, and that helped. I read a great book called Surviving Survival that I really identified with and recommend to people all the time. I also got treatment. I started talking to a psychiatrist, which also helped me understand that maybe I was being a little too hard on myself. I kept calling my boss every 6 weeks saying, I was going to be back in 6 weeks. I was going to be back in 6 weeks. And my mother says she used to leave the room when I said that and cry because everybody around me knew it wasn't true, but I didn't. And I tell folks there's a real importance for optimism, but it's got to be realistic optimism. If it's kind of this blind optimism, oh, I'll be back in 6 weeks, you're setting yourself up for failure. And I think one of the reasons that I did fall so far down was that I had these unrealistic expectations. So then I felt like I was failing recovery. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Why was I still not better? And
freedom.
Yeah.
Your freedom. I mean, you were a globe-trotter.
Yeah.
And you could go anywhere, do anything, talk to anybody. You had such purpose. You had such passion in what you do. All of that's ripped from you now. You're confined to this tiny chair that you can't do anything in at that point. And it's like, well, I want to get out of this. And I think there is some power. There's a lot of power in that willpower, right? No, I'm determined. I'm going to do this. Because your body heals faster than if you were to just say, no, I can't, and I stay stuck. And then your body just deteriorates from there. So you're already generating this healing from you. But those expectations, if they're unmet, do lead to resentments, which does lead to a crash.
Yeah. Well, and then it also, when I was really hitting the end of my rope, I was in so much pain, and then but it was time to start weaning off the fentanyl and all of the strongest because I'd been on them for so long and I didn't want to be dependent on them, and so on top of the physical pain from my injuries, when your rib cage is completely crushed into a zillion pieces, you can't keep it still. You have to breathe.
Yeah.
So, literally every breath hurt all the time.
Mm.
And when I started cutting back on the painkillers, it hurt even more. Plus, I had the withdrawal symptoms. I was shaky, I was cold, I was nauseous, and it felt like insult on injury. And that's when I finally got a little more creative and opened myself up to healing methods that I had always dismissed. Like when people would talk about yoga or breathing or meditation, I would just roll my eyes. When I was pregnant with my first son, I refused to take those Lamaze classes because I told my husband, I've been breathing for 30 years and I was pretty sure I knew how to do it. So, it was like the arrogance of good health, And so I was like, that's the most ridiculous waste of time I've ever heard of. I know how to breathe. Thank you very much. And I always felt that like yoga was like for people that didn't really actually want to exercise or sweat, And don't get me started on meditation, So but I really was at the end of my rope. I had everything Western medicine had to offer me. I had every of the best doctors around. And I was still a mess, frankly. And I did open my mind to those other types of practices. And they gave me back a sense of agency. I was surprised. I still didn't like doing it. I find breathing exercises very boring.
Mm-hmm.
But I was stunned at how they gave me back a sense of control over my body, over my pain. And I do them religiously to this day.
What do you do now? How has this affected your life?
So I work full time. I'm a executive vice president at a healthcare company. I have a very busy job, and I thought long and hard about whether once I made it over the initial hurdle of going back to work, is this really what I want to be doing? And my answer was yes for now. I also leaned into sharing my experience because when I was in a very dark place, I felt very alone. I had loving family around me, tons of people that wanted to help, but I felt like none of them could understand. And I decided to write the book that I was looking for, a book that didn't gloss over the hard parts and say, hey, I got hurt, but now I run ultra marathons. It was like, okay, great. I'm never running an ultra marathon. And the accident, not only was I thrust into a role as this completely dependent person that couldn't drive and couldn't go to the bathroom, my husband was thrust into a role of a full-time caregiver. So we
And
were
your kids, yeah. How
and
did that dynamic?
went through an extraordinary experience. So you put all that together though, and I really am proud. People have heard of survivor's guilt, but there's also something called survivor's pride because I take no credit for surviving the accident on May 12th, but it was a lot of hard work, on June 12th and July 12th and August 12th and every month after that. And so when I talk to other trauma survivors that are maybe nearer in time to their experience, nobody wants to hear it, and I wouldn't have wanted to hear it, soon after my trauma. But some of these things really, really do take time. And I'm at a place now where I'm very excited that I've been able to share my story through this book that is just launching. Not because I think my experience is the same as everyone else's, but I was given a gift of surviving this accident. And I feel like I have met my responsibility of sharing it in case my experience helps somebody else, in case some of the things that I tried that work for me, inspire somebody else that is suffering, maybe not from a train accident, but from any of the massive curveballs, that life throws at us. So that's why I wrote the book. I'm proud of
What's it called?
it to do a lot. It's called Bone by Bone, a memoir of trauma and healing. And the title Bone by Bone is meant to allude to the very gradual process of healing, but it's also, there's a poem by Emily Dickinson that talks about dissociation, that feeling of disconnectedness from everyone,
Mm-hmm.
even from your own body. It's called There Is a Pain So Utter. And it talks about how memory kind of shuts down to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go safely, whereas an open eye would drop you bone by bone. So that's why I called it that. And so where am I now? I think I have a much stronger sense of purpose. I am not going to waste 1 minute of this second chance I've been given doing things that don't matter. And so that's kind of my lens. And I spend a lot more time with friends. Um, I think my boys and I hug each other a little tighter and say I love you a bit more.
How did
And
how did
you
it affect them? How did it affect your husband and your boys?
I think it affected our marriage really substantially for many years.
Mhm.
And my husband and I really struggled to give each other what we needed. On the surface, I felt like I was saying thank you a million times over. And he felt like he was doing everything humanly possible to support me. But in reality, I think we both recognized that we weren't. My husband didn't feel that I was appreciative of how much it took for him to care for me and to care for our sons and drive me every single doctor appointment and physical therapy appointment for 2 whole years.
Yeah.
And we said horrible things to each other. So it affected quite significantly. Despite our best efforts, it was really hard to put ourselves in each other's shoes. He was very angry about the accident, and I was just sad. And I
Yeah.
had no space to hear him shake his fist. I had no mental space. I couldn't be there for him and share that emotion. And he felt like, everybody's coming to the house asking how I am, focused on me, and
Oh, is he? No,
he's
yeah.
keeping everything rolling. And so I think we
Spouses often get
yeah,
ignored. I want to highlight that. Like spouses often get ignored. So if you see someone who's going through something, ask the entire family how they're doing as
exactly.
well, instead of just because we tend to hyper focus on the one who's injured or the one who needs help, or but we don't tend to focus on the people who really have to change their lives in order to care for their loved one. And was your husband working at the time? Did he have to like change his life drastically, or how
Well,
did
the
that?
thing was, he did have to change his life drastically. He had made a career change before the accident
Mhm.
to stop being a lawyer and do a more a non-traditional. He wanted to be an entrepreneur. He had some startup ideas, so he was working at home. But a lot of those, of course, had to get put on hold. But I was fortunate that he was at home. On the other hand, we're both rattling around in the house all day, driving each other nuts, frankly.
There's something to be said too about the death of dreams um, at that current state, and to pivot and to say, okay, well, I have to put my life on back burner, which of course he gladly does, but there is a grief that has to come with that
Yeah.
because life just gives it to you. And a lot of the times in males, grief is expressed as anger.
Yeah.
Um,
You hit the nail on the head. Exactly.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
so when he gets angry, it's not because he's mad, it's because he's sad and he doesn't know how to express it. And females usually express grief as sadness,
Right.
which is funny because if you look at the movie Inside Out, his
Uh-huh.
primary emotion,
Yeah.
is sadness.
It's true.
So funny. And but there's science behind that. And how did you help your family grow beyond that?
Um, to be honest, we laughed. This may sound like a crazy answer, but we really laughed a fair amount. And I I started to set more realistic goals for myself. I decided that I would be out of bed. Three sons, they get home from school at 3 o'clock,
Yeah.
and I would at least be out of bed by 3 o'clock. Maybe not dressed, maybe not showered. On a good day, I would, brush my hair, but I would at least be out of bed. And it dawned on me, I'd worked my whole, their whole lives. I was always a full-time working mom. I'd never been at the door every single day when they got home from school. And I started to realize that there were some little hidden blessings in this experience, this enforced slowness that I'd really never encountered before. And trying to kind of collect those, if you will, and overwrite some of the bad memories, or at least layer them with good memories. And once I realized that, I started trying to do it very deliberately. And when you're working and you've got a couple weeks vacation, I would never take a vacation with just one son. I mean, of course, you don't have time for that. You all go together. And once I was a little bit healthier, I said to my youngest son, the other two happened to not be available over spring break. And I said, maybe you and I should just go somewhere. And he said, how about Japan? I went, oh, okay. I was sort of thinking the beach, but okay. And, but actually I had frequent flyer miles out the wazoo. Yeah. And I thought, you know what? As long as I can upgrade myself on a flatbed seat, you know what? And we went to Tokyo Disney. Never would have done that before. And so, of course, once you take one son on a special international trip, a month later, my middle son decides he's the adrenaline junkie, and we went to Hawaii. And, I couldn't ride the jet skis over the pounding waves with him, but I could sit on the dock and just say, how beautiful is this, And then my third son and I a year later, went to Portugal and Italy and drank and ate our way across Europe. And we had these really special experiences that helped me now balance out some of the negatives. And, I had to travel differently. Yeah, I couldn't do everything, but I could do a lot. I could do a lot.
Oh, Geralyn, I am so, so incredibly beyond words just impacted by your story. And I know that your story is going to help a million, like gazillion people. And
thank you so much.
Even though you have been through, some people will say, well, I haven't been through a train accident, right? But you have been through pain.
Absolutely.
Everybody's been through pain, physical, mental pain, emotional pain, financial pain. I mean, we're going through pain right now as a country, as a world. So
absolutely,
they can definitely get that from your book. And where can they find your book?
So the ebook and the audio version will be on Amazon very shortly. For another month or so, the book is available exclusively through bonebybonebook.com. So direct website, just order it and you'll get it shortly. The book will eventually the printed version will eventually be on Amazon as well in another month or so. My publisher has kind of a hybrid model. So it should be very easily accessible to folks. And I would love for them to consider reading it if it will help them, or give it to a friend.
Yeah. So if there is one thing that you can say to everybody listening in right now, what would you tell them?
I would encourage them to stay hopeful, to stay optimistic, to be creative, and to be gentle with themselves. To be gentle with themselves when you're going through something extraordinarily difficult. You will get through it, but don't beat yourself up about it. It may take time.
Golden rule, be kind to yourself. Yep. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. One other thing, Haley, I just do want to add, I want to make sure that folks are aware, any dime, any proceeds from the book are all being donated to the American Trauma Society and the Trauma Survivors Network. I did this to share my story, not with any expectation of making any money off the book.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.